Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm gonna talk about season 1 of Good Omens. Basically, first off, I'll start off with non-spoilers, and that is the season was great. Yeah. That's all I'm going to give you with non-spoilers, because I feel like just ignoring all that and just going straight into spoilers. So if you want my recommendation, if you have not seen it, I highly recommend you check it out. It's a lot of fun. I think the story does a lot of interesting things that I myself wasn't expecting. Maybe some of that stuff popped up in the trailers, but it's been a while since I saw the first trailer, so I don't, but there was a lot of interesting things I had expectations, and I think they knocked it out of the park with what I thought things were going to play out, but it ended up playing out differently. So I'm going to leave it at that. So if you're interested in it, I highly recommend you check it out. I believe it is well worth your time. So going forward, I will be going into spoilers, so do keep that in mind. You have been warned. Okay, so a lot of interesting things. Like, obviously, the crux of the story I think is so good, and that is, the friendship between Azaradel. I'm going to butcher that a lot. Trust me, I'm always going to have to, because even though it's supernatural, like, angel names always kind of give me trouble, but nevertheless, him and Crowley, that supernatural is going to screw me up on that too. Nevertheless, their friendship, even though, Azaradel wouldn't want it to be considered a friendship, obviously it's a crux of the story, and it's such a good foundation, just like the way they complement each other in their own way. It's interesting, because I went into this thinking like, okay, they came together just for this apocalypse thing. It's like, no, they've known each other since the beginning of everything. They met, they've been friends for 6,000 years, which I think it's wow, I didn't expect that to be where the storyline took us. I even love it. It's because some of the things that kind of took me by surprise is finding out that Crowley was the serpent. I was like, oh, because typically that's always Lucifer. And it's like, oh, Crowley, he's the actual serpent. And that's actually where him and Azaradel actually met. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Like Adam and Eve leaving the garden. I even love that Azaradel gave him the flaming sword, and Crowley's like, wait, what? You did that? He's like, then he started thinking what if I actually did the right thing by letting them know about everything? And what if you actually did the wrong thing by giving them the sword? It's like, what? That's impossible. But it started making them think, and I just thought that was kind of interesting. And I did like to kind of look throughout their histories and stuff like that, of just how we got to where they are present day and everything, that they've constantly been in each other's life, because it's obviously heaven and hell, they're stopping humanity, heaven being the good, hell being the bad, trying to tempt them towards bad. But it's Azaradel and Crowley would constantly meet, and they'd cancel each other. And over to the point, Crowley was like, you know what, how about we just report back that we're doing a whole bunch of stuff, and when actuality we didn't. He's like, what? That would be lying in the sun. It's like, oh, who cares? They wouldn't check in. And it turns out that entire time they never did. Because I even love it, because Crowley gets promoted and stuff like that, because they talk about later on, it's he's the one that claimed he started World War II. He's like, it's not my fault humanity kind of beat me to it. I love that it's a demon is very lazy about tempting humans. He tempts here and there, but it's some of the stuff, it's we're going to cross paths and cancel each other out, so why really even bother with it? It makes you wonder. I guess in the grand scheme of things, they're the only, obviously they tempt people here and there, but I guess they're them. I guess everyone's got their own mission, so it's what demon and angel would tempt out of their missions, kind of back out. So I guess that's why no one ever bothered checking on it. It's every angel and demon believes in what they're doing. I guess that's kind of the whole crazy situation. I guess because of that, because there was no oversight, they were able to just kind of get away with everything they were doing for so long. I even love it when it came to the flood and everything, and even Crowley be like, you're gonna kill all these people, and Zaradel's like, no, just the locals. I'm sure it's not going to affect the Chinese, Native Americans, or the Australians. It's if you say so. And just oh, there's going to be kids getting killed. Even Crowley's I'm not really good about the whole killing kids thing. I'm that says a lot, that a demon is kind of yeah, killing kids is kind of super messed up, but this flood that's supposed to happen, it's oh, and I love that, oh, don't worry, a new thing created called rainbow. It's supposed to make up for that. It's supposed to be a little sign of oh, promise not to flood you and kill you anymore. It's that's super funny and super messed up. That's so twisted. I love that. I even love Crowley being wait, one of your unicorns is getting away. There's still at least one left. I'm it makes you wonder what happened to that other unicorn. Since we don't have unicorns here. And that's kind of a neat little wink to be there were magical creatures that existed. I mean, at the very least, unicorns, but one ran away, the other one ended up dying in some shape or form, hence why we don't have them today. So it was just kind of a nice thing. But I love that they constantly met each other and they kind of, whether Azarael want to admit it or not, he's like, no, we're not friends. It's like, and I thought, I'm jumping all over the place, but I do love that Crowley was kind of like when he thought Azarael was dead, he's like, you killed my best friend. I was like, oh, that's so sweet. I mean, to be fair, you've been in each other's lives for 6,000 years. If that's not a best friendship, I don't know what a best friendship is then, and I thought that was kind of interesting, because even though they had their differences and stuff like that, they still found themselves connected to each other, enjoying each other's company and stuff like that. I love that. Like, they nitpick about stuff here and there, but once again, that's the beautiful foundation of the show, is just that relationship they have. I think it's so good. Everyone else around them is all about like, oh, let's bring about Armageddon, about the apocalypse and everything, and they're the only two on either side that's like, I don't really know about this, because I think for them it's like, and that says something, because it's like, as a demon, he should be all about it or whatever. But it's like, to me, this, and it ends up coming up later on, all this is like an ego trip. Like, angels wants to settle the score once and for all, and so do demons. And I love what the continuity did. Maybe like this actually exists within the Bible and stuff like that, but I've never seen other continuities do this. Like, the only fallen angel I'm really ever aware of is Lucifer in most stuff. So the fact is that every demon was an angel at one point in time, even Crowley. I was like, it's like, oh, it makes sense and everything, but I don't know. I just thought that was kind of fascinating. With that whole situation. I should also really quickly point out, there's a shit ton of actors in this that I'm like familiar with. Obviously, like, I've seen Michael Sheen from time to time. I'm obviously familiar with David Tennant. I'm gonna butcher her name, but it's the Adria, the actress who plays Anathema. Like I said, I'm terrible with names. One of the things I know her from is she played Dorothy in Emerald City. Sadly, a very short-lived show. I really enjoyed it, but I was like, because I kept looking like I was familiar with it. And then Jack Whitehall, what is her name? Morelli Enos. She's the actress who plays War. She's in World War Z, The Killing. The actor who plays Famine is Vincent from the originals. Dude, I could just go on and on. Freaking John Hamm is Gabriel. Satan is voiced by Benedict Cumberbatch. Frances McDormand as God, which is kind of interesting. Just on a little side note, it's just interesting because this is like the second thing associated with Neil Gaiman that's done that to a certain extent. Just like the voice of God narrating things. Like, there's an episode of Lucifer where Neil Gaiman was voicing God in like it was basically a what if episode. It was one of the bonus episodes in season 3. Just a little thing, and I've just kind of been like, oh, that's so interesting. Also, since we're on the Neil Gaiman train, I think it's so funny. Like, one of the little Easter eggs I noticed, the book that guard at the Air Force base is reading, it's American Gods. Because I saw Neil Gaiman's name, I was like, what book is that? And I rewound it into American Gods. I was like, dude. Which, I know, if you've never seen American Gods, I highly recommend you watch that. I like the show. I don't know how most people feel, but that's just my opinion. I know I'm going on a huge tangent and everything, but it's just like, dude, like, the freaking celebrities, the famous actors and stuff, familiar faces, it was just throwing me off. But nevertheless, I went on for a huge tangent. I do apologize. I got to remember where I was at. But it kind of reiterating what I was bringing up before, I just thought it was kind of interesting that that's what this was all about. Like, I mean, angels thought they were right, sure, but at the same time, it's more so like a point to be like, oh yeah, we're better. That's all it was really all about. It's kind of interesting because I even love how God kind of explained everything at the beginning, being like, oh, like one philosopher or whatever, some dude was actually not too far off. He got the year that the earth and everything was created back in like, what, 4004 BC. He was off time-wise because he said 9 a.m. It was actually 9:13 that everything got created. I thought that was so funny. I love that. There's so much to break down about this. Obviously, everything with the prophecy, that story angle is so good about like Agnes and like the prophecy she'd written and had known about every little thing. I was like, that's such a neat little story device that like obviously talks about the prophecy and everything, and Anathema, her story in this, like being a great descendant, like, trying to be what was necessary to stop essentially the apocalypse. And the fact is, the connection between her and, what was it? Oh God, what is the family name again? His great-great-great-grandfather's name was like, thou shalt not commit adultery. Because I love that Agnes was like, oh, adultery's coming to town. And he's like, that's my given name, but that's not what he went by. I love that basically it's like, because I was like, oh, did they mess up and but it's like, no, like Agnes killed everyone in the village by stuffing herself of like, I forgot what it was, but it was also like gunpowder and stuff and the explosion. It was a whole thing, but I love that their stories ended up bringing them together in a positive way rather than a negative way, because it's like, oh, he's a witch finder and his ancestors burn witch. Obviously, witch finders take down witches. The whole Shadwell situation, Tracy. Dude, there's just too much to go over that's so good. Because the story kind of took a lot of directions I wasn't expecting. Like, Anathema, it's like they're near, Adam the entire time, never realizing it. I love it, too, that little element of like, oh, yeah, she couldn't see his aura. And I love the way God was like, trying to see Adam's aura. It's like someone in Times Square trying to see America. Like, his aura was just too big. She didn't realize technically she was just standing in it, the reason why she couldn't see it. It's just the little details like that. That was such an interesting comparison to make. And Newton, I love just all the little things, because like it's so weird too. It's like basically all those weird magazines Anathema was giving to him. It's like it almost seemed like she was into some, like, I love her like pointing out all this stuff of like, oh, you shouldn't this and that and this. It's almost like she's a little bit of a conspiracy theorist to a certain extent. I don't know whether it's just because she grew up reading these magazines, or maybe I don't know whether it's 100% she knew that it was truth or not. It's like you having like the ability to kind of see like prophecies and stuff like that. It just seemed interesting that she had all these magazines about kind of crazy outlandish stuff like Atlantis and stuff like that, and she believed it, and she was even trying to get Adam to believe it. And I love it because of his powers and everything. He started manifesting everything, like freaking Atlantis rising to the surface, the Kraken popping up later on. I loved it. And I love the situation of, what was it I was just thinking of? I am honestly completely blanking on what I was trying to say. I'm so sorry. It's going to bother the crap. I literally just don't remember where I was kind of really going. I was going to bring up some point, but it's slipping my mind. So I'll go into what's kind of next in my head. I do like the whole dog situation. I love it. It's like, oh yeah, here's the big, bad hellhound, and it turns into this cute, adorable dog, and Adam's like, oh, I'm just naming him Dog and everything. And it's actually kind of interesting, too, like how the dog situation played out, because like Dog entered like Anathema's house. There was a horseshoe that basically burned out because obviously and I love that line from God being like, nature shapes forms, essentially. And because Adam was who he was at that point in time, like, and I guess the form that the dog had taken wasn't so menacing and scary, like the form it had taken, like its nature had kind of shifted, or was it rather shape, or was it form shapes nature, or was it actually the reversal? Either way, I just thought that was kind of a neat little thing. It wasn't like this scary thing anymore, like, because even to the point a cat was punking him. But I love like the moment the dog went inside Anathema's place, like the rest of the hell in it kind of got burned away. So I thought that was kind of a neat little thing, kind of showing that the dog wasn't like pure evil or whatever, like it was kind of set up to be, Right, I remember where my brain was going with everything. Like, I was bringing up all those different things that came true. The alien thing, I loved it. And you have, like, Newton just being there like, oh, wait, what's going on here? And the fact of the matter is that an alien just pops up and is like, oh, yeah, like, how long has your species been around? Oh, wow, that's crazy, that's wild. Why do you think we were brought together? Like, we heard a message of peace and stuff like that. And he brings it up, Shadwell, and Shadwell's like, you're a witch hunter, not an alien hunter. He's like, fine, I'll make note of it. I love when, like, the world is so crazy. Yeah, like, obviously, there's some weirdness to it, but he just kind of accepts it. And I love that level of disbelief, of just, not necessarily disbelief, but acceptance of just like, oh, I just met aliens. You're freaking out a little bit, but at the same time, it's like, he never brings it up to anyone later on. Just kind of like, man, the world is crazy. Everything's wild. I love that just being a thing. It's also sad, too, because I love that the entire season he's trying to be like, oh, people bring up, like, oh, it's like his car, why it's named, was it Dick Tropin? Whatever the case may be. And like he explains it later on because it's some famous highwayman. And for him, it's like every time his car's on the road, it stops traffic or something like that. And that's what it was. It was some crazy thing because I love Anathema being like, I don't want to know. Fine, I want to know. I'm going to regret it. And she immediately regretted it upon knowing it. But nevertheless, there's a lot of stuff to kind of break down. It's kind of interesting because, like, it's a point that Azaradel and Crowley end up bringing up later on is that, like, if they weren't as incompetent as they were, things wouldn't have worked out. There's a level of incompetence around that kind of worked out in everyone's favor. Shadwell, I love what we end up finding out about Shadwell in two different ways. One, that he's the dude, he's the human contact that, well, kind of the, what's her face, the Witchfinders connection that they were going to use to try and find Antichrist. I love that they separately went to him because that was their only contact. I just love that being a thing. I was like, I didn't expect that. That was kind of a pretty neat turn of events. But I also love that Shadwell started making up names for people. It's like, oh, this person's here and this and that. And then, like, what was it? Like, one of the lower ranking people was Milk, who's deceased. It's like, yeah, his imagination was reaching the bounds of how far it could go. So I just thought that was so neat. Kind of showing that Shadwell wasn't always in the right state of mind. I also love the whole him and Tracy thing. I love because him calling her a harlot and stuff like that. Yeah, he says all that stuff, but he cares about it because even at the end, he's like, if you want to come after the whore of Babylon, you're going to have to go through me. And she's like, oh, Mr. Shadwell. And even just the fact is that he eats food from her and stuff like that, always wondering, like, what exactly is going on over here? I love the little seance where Azaradel had possessed her body, and that whole situation with Ron and his wife, and he's like, I don't have to worry about my heart condition. I'm already dead. He's like, I've been able to tell you something. I haven't been able to get a word in edgewise. Shut up. And it's like, oh man, that was I love that being such a thing. Because it does seem like, oh, she was faking it, like, obviously. But then she's like, oh no, like, I'm really tapping into something now. So obviously it seems like there is some validity to kind of what she does. But most times it just seems like it's probably just a parlor trick to kind of mess with people. I love later on when it's like, okay, oh, that weapon you got, Shadwell, is going to help us stop the apocalypse and everything. What is that weapon shoot? He's like, silver bullets. It's like, that's werewolves. Garlic, that's vampires. Bricks, that'll do the job. I also thought it was kind of pretty neat, the whole Adam situation in many different regards. Like, well, first and foremost, like the whole friendship thing I thought was kind of neat with Pepper, Wesley Dale, even that sad thing of like, oh, even his parents don't even call him by his name. They just call him Youngster. And what was it? Brian. Every group needs a Brian. But he just kind of goes along with everything Adam says. But it's kind of nice because obviously Pepper's kind of like the most assertive of the friends and stuff like that. And it comes out in the end when she ends up kicking War and taking War's sword, which turns out to be Azaradale's flaming sword. I love that constantly comes up. It's like, where's your sword? Because even God asked him at one point in time, it's like, where's that sword of yours? He's like, what? And just God never asked anymore. It's like, does she care? Does she know? Because I love for her, like, the whole explanation of, like, she's playing a whole different game. Everyone thinks it's... What was it she was saying? She was referencing one specific game of, like, everyone thinks that they're playing this, but in actuality, she's playing, like, a whole other game, smile on her face and everything. It was kind of interesting, kind of breaking that down. Kind of even love it coming up later on. It's like, do you think God, plays games or something like that? And you have Crowley being like, telling Gabriel's like, where the hell have you been not knowing that, I was actually surprised to see the story, but getting back to it, the storyline with Adam and his friends kind of shifting into what it did. Like, I thought it was just going to be like I don't know, I didn't expect it to be what it is, but it's like, obviously they're his foundation to his human life and everything. Obviously when he started slipping more and more to, because I thought it was going to be the thing of like, because I was curious, because I thought it was so interesting, because obviously Anathema is like supposed to be finding him and stopping him, but in a weird way she ended up kind of fueling him into who he was. Like, I guess seeing who he was, I guess the voices got louder and kind of revealed to him as like, oh, this is who I'm supposed to be. And so when the situation came down to it, like, obviously he started getting more and more monstrous, forcing his friends to be there, taking their mouths away at one point in time, making them smile. And, even to the point, Dog ran away from him. It's like, the Hellhound's supposed to be by your side, but it didn't like him anymore. And it's like, wow, well, I didn't expect his storyline to kind of take that shift like that. So I thought that was pretty impressive. How that was all executed, because like for him, it's like that human side of him is like, no, I don't want you guys to go away. I'm sorry. Like, it's like, it's his friends. Like, he wanted them by his side. I was like, oh, we'll rule the world. I give you these continents. You can get this continent. Dog, you can get Australia. That whole situation. I didn't talk about it either, but I do love the situation that, like, once again, it isn't just like we jump straight to the apocalypse. So it's like, no, this has been 11 years in the making, that you have Crowley and Aziraphale, like, I'm just butchering these names. Nevertheless, God, I'm terrible at this. I do apologize. If you didn't know, now you know. I'm a complete and utter idiot. I'm sure there's been plenty of examples before that, but nevertheless, I do love the fact is that they were secretly looking after the wrong kid the entire time. The warlock situation, like that whole everything kind of getting screwed up, the baby's getting switched around. And I love that too. It's like, oh, what about this third baby that's at play here? Where did that baby ever go? I don't know. It's like, oh, maybe hopefully that baby's somewhere out there kind of living its life or whatever, because it just grew up just being a normal baby. But there was a whole like warlock situation. They were trying to keep him as balanced as possible. It's like, oh, Crowley kind of tempting him while Aziraphale would, try and tempt it towards good, kind of keeping him as normal as possible. I even love that Crowley dresses up as like the nanny and Aziraphale is the gardener and stuff like that. I love that. But getting back to what I was bringing up before, the whole baby switching situation, it just took everything going wrong, and I loved it. Especially that one particular sister. She kind of brought up something that was kind of interesting that never really got answered. I interpreted her question as being like, well, we know how the birds and the bees work with us, but it's like, how did the whole Satan and Antichrist situation happen? It's kind of like, it's not our place to answer. Because like they were doing all this, I was like, wait, these are nuns. It's like, oh yes, they're evil nuns, satanic nuns. I didn't know that was a thing. I wonder, is that really a thing? Maybe it's come up before. This is the first time I vividly remember ever coming across satanic nuns, but I love that it was just kind of a mishap and everything was just wrong. And it's like for the past 11 years they've been looking after the wrong kid. I also love the birthday party situation of like Aziraphale being like, oh, I'm from Magic. Crowley's like, oh god, no, it's rubbish. Just stop. And crazy situation they found themselves in. I thought it was kind of interesting because obviously, like, Aziraphale kind of hid the whole thing from Crowley. The whole like, oh, I found the Book of Prophecies. Granted, it was the Book of Agnes's. Apparently, there's multiple books of prophecies, but Agnes's is the most accurate. That's kind of what hers is kind of known for. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But to know that there's multiple books of prophecies, I guess it kind of makes sense in the grand scheme of things. But I was wondering like why Aziraphale wasn't telling Crowley about it. I was like, but I think for him, it's like he probably thought like, oh, he can handle things. Like if he talks to the right people, everything's going to work out. Even the whole Metatron situation, which I didn't know Metatron was a real angel. Like I always thought that was just a supernatural thing. Apparently not. I guess same thing with Crowley, because Crowley's popped up obviously supernatural and now this. So I guess that's a real demon's name. No idea. It's just a lot of things. Once again, I'm not that well versed in the Bible and stuff like that, so like a lot of stuff kind of like surprises me and stuff like that. So it's like, oh, it's always interesting to find out stuff, but nevertheless. But getting back to what I was saying, I guess he just felt like he could be the one to kind of talk to someone higher up to do it, but it's like, no, everyone higher up was kind of like, oh, this is meant to be, we're supposed to fight, we're supposed to win. Like that's all they were ever concerned about. It's like, well, what about humanity being continental? What? Never came up about anyone else's concerns. And I thought that was kind of the beauty of it, because it's like the only people they could find, Aziraphale and Crowley could ever find to kind of agree with them is each other. Like, and I guess that showed that it was, mainly them against the world. Even to that point where, Aziraphale at one point is like, we're not friends. I don't even like you. And Crowley's like, yes, you do. He always made it like you're an angel and I'm a demon. We shouldn't cooperate, which is like crazy considering the fact is they had the complicated relationship they did. I mean, hell, he's the reason why you were able to get away, considering the fact is you literally got caught. Was it in Paris? I think that was Paris or whatever. He's going to be executed because he came dressing like an Englishman in France or whatever. Yes, and it was because he wanted to cross over to get a crepe at the time. Like, that's why that all happened. Basically, he was told not to do any more miracles because him doing miracles, he started doing too much frivolous stuff. But I love it because it's a situation of like, hey, like, we help each other out. Like, it wasn't a thing of just kind of like, oh, like when something needs to be done, I'll go there, I'll do the good and the evil, you owe me one. Like, it just like both of them would, like one would go off and play both roles. It was never like, oh, I'll go do my part, you go do yours. It's like one of us will go do that. And at one point, Crowley's like, okay, I'll help out with this whole Shakespeare thing of making it happen. I'll owe you one for the fact that you're the one kind of doing all this. I even love that there was a line that Crowley said that William Shakespeare was like, oh yeah, I liked it. I even love it being like, okay, I'll get Hamlet more famous, but I'd rather it be one of the more funny ones, which I didn't know Shakespeare had funny, because most of his stuff is tragic. And to be fair, I haven't fully read everything. I've only read excerpts of like a little bit of Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, stuff like that. So I don't know. It was just kind of interesting. It also surprised me, that whole angle about holy water. It's interesting learning what we kind of learned about, demons. Like, for one, like, obviously what holy water does to them. It doesn't just kill their body. Because there was an element I never I love that they kept bringing it up too. It's like angels here look the way they do, sure, but they're not in real body. Like that's not like, it's not a thing of like, oh, it's kind of like the supernatural thing of like they need a body to house their essence, pretty much like demons do and angels have to in supernatural. So I wonder if there's some like connection in all of that. But nevertheless, I thought that was kind of interesting. But also like how like it feels to walk on consecrated ground. It's like, and I love his being like. For Crowley, it's like, oh, it's like walking on a beach without shoes. I love that whole Nazi situation of like, oh my god, like the person, he thought he was working with an English spy, but in actuality it was a German spy. It was all about collecting the books of prophecies, and Crowley shows up to be like, yeah, there's a bomb coming, if you guys run now, you'll live. But it's like, yeah, I'm gonna use my devilish powers to make it happen that the bomb comes down, and maybe it'd be a miracle that me and my friends survive. And it's like, oh, every time Zeradel would be like, oh, you're so kind, thank you. He's like, don't you dare talk about kind and that I saved your life. I'd get in so much trouble if we get found out. But I was always wondering, it was supposed to be an insurance policy, but I was wondering why he wanted the holy water. Because I think even Zeradel at the point kind of thought was like, oh, it's a suicide thing. But it's like, no, it comes in handy because he ends up killing one of the demons coming after him. But I also love the fact is that traveling into telephone, that's such a little interesting little thing that demons can do. And I love the whole thing of like, oh, how many angels could dance on the head of a needle or whatever. And it was like, for one, angels don't dance. Aziraphale ended up learning the gavotte, but it went out of style, so he doesn't know how to dance. But if you were talking about the gavotte, it could be one. But, you know, demons are in a different sort of like just going into the phone and everything. Hauser following him, which I also love that stupid thing with like Hauser kept killing those demons that looked alike and everything. Like one made a joke and he's like, I don't like jokes, I don't tell jokes, that's not my thing, killed him. The next dude, he killed him because he's like, oh yeah, you know, it's like, oh, what's a photo op? It's like, it's kind of, you know what a selfie is, right? You know, Crowley ended up making him, that pissed him off. So, and then he kind of is like, oh, I guess this is going to be the big avocado, kind of copying the first dude's joke, and he's laughing. It's like, you're a weirdo. And he kind of tries to make it go like, oh yeah, when he thinks he's meeting with the real Antichrist, but it ended up being Warlock instead of Adam. I wonder, maybe there's significance to the name Adam Warlock. Just because that's a, you know, obviously within the MCU, I don't know too much within the grand scheme of just the Marvel comics themselves. I know it's a character, I just don't know too much about the character, but there's a character named Adam Warlock in the Marvel Comics, so I'm wondering, is there significance to that outside of all of that, since there just happened to be like someone named Warlock and someone named Adam. I mean, you know, in this case, it also makes sense too, because in the grand scheme of things, it's like, why I'm an idiot didn't piece it together. I was like, oh yeah, Adam and Eve. Should have figured that, considering Adam and Eve literally pop up at the beginning of the season. Regardless, I'm just an idiot. Once again, I've already kind of established that. But nevertheless, I love the fact is that he basically had Aziraphale stuck on his voicemail. I thought that was kind of interesting, and also kind of messed him up because it's like Aziraphale had left a message being like, "Oh, I know where the Antichrist is," and he was basically stuck on that tape in a loop until someone called and he got out the phone and. Everyone in that office got killed because he ate their flesh, like filled the room up with maggots and their flesh was eaten. I was like, oh, I feel so bad for them. So many interesting things. Obviously, like, you know, Adam, like I said, shifting his situation to be like, no, I'm going to stop the apocalypse. Anathema and Newton becoming a thing and everything. I even love her being like, yeah, Agnes saw that coming. He's like, no way. And she's kind of reading a card that was basically almost like, you go, boy. And I was like, oh, wow, she even predicted that. It's so interesting. And I love that, you know, Newton kept bringing up a good point of like, have you ever just kind of lived for yourself, just be anathema? You know, it's like for her, she's lived her entire life of being like, okay, got to follow Agnes's stuff. It's also interesting, too, because she was basically like, you know, Agnes's prophecies roughly pan out to be like about one a month is typically how the prophecies end up playing out, except obviously there's been more and more as the apocalypse is nearing. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting, you know, aspect. But for Anathema, it's like, this is who I'm supposed to be, this is what I'm supposed to do. So it's like for her, it's like she's been readying her entire life to follow, you know, Agnes's, you know, prophecies and stuff like that, and understand like what her role is to play and everything, you know. But I love the fact is that her and Newton were a thing. I love that later on. It's like, oh, did we kind of save the world? Because I love that Newton's thing about technology, him being terrible with computers, ended up being what was necessarily to save the world. And I love it. Like, holy crap. And it's like, yeah. It's like, did you just save the world? It's like, yeah, me and my boyfriend did. And he's like, yeah. Newton's like, wait, what? Boyfriend? I love that. because I loved it in the end, you know, when it came to everyone being together, Aziraphale, Crowley, Anathema, as well as Newton. It was kind of the kids that kind of helped stop everything because of their friendship, because they kind of kept, you know, Adam grounded. Like, he's a kid, so obviously it's that whole thing of, like, you know, story philosophy wise, like, oh, the weight of everything kind of being on a kid and everything, that you know, I always make reference to, like, Avatar: The Last Airbender, kind of like, oh, is that being an interesting story element to kind of see that implemented in this in a certain regard, because he is just a kid who kind of got swept up by his, you know, obviously of who he's supposed to be, but also not knowing who he's supposed to be, like, kind of everything rushed to him. It's like, oh, I got all this power, making all this stuff happen. But his friends kind of turning against him made him kind of be like, all right, I kind of lost myself for a second, so we got to stop the end of the world, because they brought up points of being like, you don't have to end the world, you know, to make things better, just make the world itself better. And each one of his friends stepped up and ended up defeating one of the 4 horsemen, except for Death, because if you kill Death, there could be kind of undo a lot of stuff in reality, because you kind of need Death in existence. I wonder, are they permanently dead, or there always a possibility of them coming back? The other 3 horsemen: famine, war. I also love that, like, pollution is one, because pestilence retired. It makes you wonder, like, where does one of the horsemen go when they're on retirement? Nevertheless, I love that situation. I also love, like, the dude that's dropping off the mail throughout the season, just like where his story ended. It's like just these little bits here and there. Even the fact is, they go like, oh, they show you he's got like a wife, or you know, or you know, a significant other or whatever, and it's like, oh, it's like interesting getting this background to this character that's just popping up here and there doing stuff. It's like, oh, he actually kind of felt bad, because it's like he left a note to his wife, or you know, Maud, telling her that he loved her, and it's like, oh, I was like, oh, you didn't get hit by the truck. Oh, that's, and he's like, oh. And you looked at it, it's like his body is like, yeah, he had to die so he could meet death. I was like, oh man, that sucks for him to do the job necessary. I mean, this has been like 6,000 years in the making, even though the business has technically only been around 80 years. It was a whole thing. I love that situation. But luckily they did stop the apocalypse. Obviously, you know, Gabriel and Beelzebub weren't too happy about that situation. But what I loved is the whole thing of like, well, they kind of bring up something, you kind of bring it all full circle. It's like, well, how do you know that this is the same plan that God has? Like, God's plan is ineffable, right? So it's something you shouldn't know about. So how can you be so certain that you're going with God's plan and not going against it? You know, you'd hate to do that. And it kind of puts them at a standstill. I love it being like, you know, Gabriel's like, you're a disobedient child, and I hope someone tells your father. And Beelzebub's like, someone will. And he's like, there. And so Satan kind of rises afterwards. But I like it, that moment of like, you know, Crowley freezing time. You know, you have Aziraphale having his flaming sword again, and they're both being there to talk to him. It's like, basically, he has to be the one to kind of shift things. And I love the conversation of being like, you're not in it, you know, you're not good incarnate, you're not evil incarnate, you're the best thing, you're human incarnate. That basically, because he represents humans, like that side is what's most important in this case, him being human. That's what changed everything. That's what made him not go all full-blown antichrist. And so when his dad rises up, it's like, you're not my dad. The fact of the matter is, you can't come into my life. The only person that can be my dad is my actual dad that's been there for me. And basically, because of his powers, he rewrites reality to make it so that, oh, his dad has been his dad the entire time. Now, the grand scheme of things, I love that it does seem like there are major changes because of that. Oh, he was never the Antichrist. But there's that point later on when we see that the bush kind of burn away so that, like, his dog can run so he can get out of the garden and stuff like that. Like, was that him? Was that dog? Like, is there, because obviously, like, because even Aziraphale is like, to his best knowledge, it seems like Adam's just purely human now, so that was interesting. But I did like that it basically undid a lot of stuff. Like, well, for one, the whole, like, you know, I love the whole thing about, like, the M23 highway or whatever, that basically that's something that Crowley had made, and now it turned into a large ring of fire. I even love the lady on the news being like, it's like on fire or whatever. It's like, wait, what does that mean? But basically, no one could get in it. It's like he basically screwed himself over in this situation. But, like, Hauser's there in the car with him, and he drives through and everything, and Hauser gets burned away. But for him, it's and I love God being like, oh yeah, because he has something no other demon has, imagination. He believed that the car would come through, and the car's on fire, and the cops on the other side are like, wait, what is that? And they're like, the cop lady's like, not our problem. But he was waving at us. But I love that he made it all the way there. I love the two instances of like miscommunication. One was like the whole thing with the nurses, not the nurses, the nuns and everything. It's like the weeks meaning completely different things, but each one kept misinterpreting it. But I also love they kind of brought that back with like the neighbor from like the neighborhood watch, him doing the whole thing of being like, oh, this is how what he really needs to respond with, but this is how he actually responds. You know, I just love that little bit with like, oh, the whole, you know, your car's on fire and you're sitting there, you know, I just loved it. But you also felt bad for Crowley too, because he lost the car just at the end too, just as he made it and everything. The car exploded, and it's like, oh, he's grieving because he's had that car for so long and everything. But I do love like how everything ends up ultimately playing out. It's like, oh, Anathema and, you know, Newton are together and everything. But there's also like, oh, they receive notes from Agnes, like to come and set in motion. It's like the next saga of the world. And it's like, oh, wow. I was like, now that could easily be like a continuation of like, you could see that being a plot point. But it's like, I was like, oh, wow. So I guess there is potential leaving room open for a sequel. Oh, nope. Because they immediately burned that because, you know, Anathema doesn't want to be bound to what her, you know, being Agnes's descendant anymore. It's like she wants to be able to live her own life, be her own person. So it's like there's a lot of good that could be in that, but she doesn't want to live that life anymore. Doesn't want to be bound to that. She already spent so much of her life already kind of bound to it. Why spend the rest of it, you know? So there's that. Adam, you know, I didn't even think about it at the time, like, oh, Adam escaping the garden. Like, it took me, like, until he got out of it, and I was like, oh, Adam getting out of the garden, he's running by taking an apple from one of the neighbors, you know? Obviously, like, you know, back to a normal life to a certain extent. Crowley's car is back in full condition. Azara's bookstore was back and everything too. It's just a combination of so much. The whole Tracy and Shadwell situation, it's just kind of like it's like, you know, and she's like, oh, ex-harlot and everything. He's like, how many nipples do you have? She's like, 2, you know, like usual. And then he was like, oh, well, I can, you know, them wanting to move in together. I'm like, what? That's so cool. Because for him, it's like, well, he's not much of a witch finder. And she's like, I'm not much of a witch, but you managed to find me. And it's just it's love and just friendship is in the air. It's a beautiful thing. Like, everything kind of works out in the end. Obviously, heaven and hell grab Crowley and Aziraphale. The moment they mentioned the point of like, oh, you need to like choose your face wisely, I was like, is that what I think it is? And it, lo and behold, it turns out it is. They switched and pretended to be each other because they wanted to make a point to be like, oh, like heaven looks at him riding out, like Aziraphale coming out of flames, and Crowley never being affected by holy water. It's like, oh, he's something else. So you guys will leave me alone for now. Obviously, it'll work for now, but it won't last forever. And so for them, it's a situation of, you know, eventually it's going to turn into a big one. It's like, I thought this was a big one. And Crowley's like, nope, the big one is going to be us versus all of heaven and hell, because they're going to come after us sooner or later. And I was like, oh man, that's so interesting. So that in itself potentially could set up a sequel. So I don't know. But I mean, overarching, like I said, I love that all the stories do kind of come to an end. Like everything does kind of, there is this happy ending and everything, you know. It's like no longer belonging to heaven and hell. They are just kind of two friends together. We're kind of on our own side throughout all of this, you know. And now I'm sitting here thinking about it. He did package and send back all those items that were connected to the 4 horsemen, including his flaming sword. So I'm wondering if that's supposed to represent the fact is that, yeah, they are alive as long as their tools are alive. Like, they'll be sent back, but, you know, if there never ever time need be for them to kind of be risen up again, then those guys can return, you know. So like I said, I don't think they're completely dead, but maybe they are. Were they completely burned away by the sword? Were they absorbed by the sword? I'm assuming the whole burning away by the sword, considering, like, it almost seems like he's the only one that had a weapon like that. I mean, to be fair, we don't know what other arsenal was under each angel's weapon, but that was definitely his. So like I said, it's kind of interesting because, like, you know, obviously with things kind of ending the way it does, it is kind of a complete ending. Obviously there's room for, like, oh, you could see where, you know, our 2 heroes story would take them going forward, but every other chapter is closed. Like, any potential room for a sequel got shut down when, like, Anathema and Newton burned those pages to be like, oh, like, that was easy. The saga continues. It's like, no, it doesn't. So because I was even reading up too, being like, oh, is there potential for a season 2? Because even Neil Gaiman was like, it'd be cool, tantalizing was the word I was reading, but it has a beginning, a middle, and end, which it does. So it's like, obviously, depending on how well the show does, maybe that potentially can change things. But I think it is kind of nice for it just to be an open and shut case. Like, I mean, everyone wants like a complete package, and this story has it. Like, obviously, you can think beyond this, like, oh, what would it be like them going up against heaven and hell? But I think the story's told the way it's told, and just think that obviously this angel and his demon will have random misadventures, obviously trying to avoid being killed by heaven and hell along the way, so, and because like I said, literally every other character story is closed out either way, so that's why I'm kind of like, yeah, it's kind of an open shut case, and I think it's okay. It's that whole thing of like, it's okay for not everything to continue. Well, once again, it's like 99% of the story is closed. Technically 100%. Like, obviously there's stuff beyond this, but the stories themselves are closed, so there wouldn't be any need to really go for it. So if they ever did decide like, hey, we're going to make a season 2 to this, cool, but I am 100% okay with them not doing it because we got the story needed. I mean, I'm sure, because like, I believe this is only one book, and I'm sure this entire season was based on that one story from the book. So, but yeah, I think that's enough rambling for me. I think I said all I really wanted to say. So, till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.